Greetings, coming to you live from Strong Island Entertainment, Tug of Heart, with the twins Lori and Leroy Cordova. Today, what a challenging one. Compulsion. As always, I'm going to start with a little disclaimer. We are not the authority. We simply bring to you a conversation between siblings and twins for your consideration. And I'm going to start with a little something I wrote. Love in 500 words or less. Accompany me, friends, as I share love in 500 words or less. Abandoned plans and a heart that has reasons that reason itself can't explain. I entertain the most impractical of desires. I spent a lifetime trying to tame want, need, and desire. Not unlike the madman who daily attempts to beat the seasons into submission. The rise and fall of a lover's chest, when a sigh catapults our ambition to warlike action, is what we most longingly adore. Our daily alibi, spoon-fed to our conscience, is when at last we're free to celebrate the powder kisses gifted by the object of our interest, a century ago yesterday morning. The words whispered that we can never understand but know the essence of their meaning is forever the prize. I had a long talk with my friend Trouble, and he insists on his finding the concealed hair's trail to happiness. I used to be so strong, and so many times I've sworn amazement at my growth and understanding. I haven't counted my words yet, but they just called Last Dance. And I think I just found forever in a glance carrying I love you 1,000 times from across the room. Close your eyes and pray. I'll let you know how it goes. I celebrate compulsive behavior, and I was compelled to read that story because as we go through this, the very definition of compulsion is it's an action that is against one's wishes. And sometimes we have to break out of that against one's wishes mentality and do things that are uncomfortable to spur growth and change. So I've tried and I've struggled with this topic. There's just no easy way to package it so that its understanding is universal. But I know that it has everything to do with intrusive thoughts that spur actions. Ooh. And in my consideration of this topic, I was challenged by the idea that compulsive behavior is not universal. And I think for some people, compulsive behavior could even be, or I'm forced to consider that they may see it as the voice of God. And God I should really replace the word God, I should just say deity, because it's some outside force, some outside pull, gravity, weight, that puts these thoughts in our head that become actions, and that is what we recognize as compulsion, compulsive behavior, and everything in that arena. So, Lori?
Hi.
How are you?
Good. I like what you wrote. Not to be outdone, I have a little something I'd like to read.
Shoot.
What's the worst thing I could do today? I don't want to do that. That's it. Is that 10 words or less, maybe? Anyways, my point being that this would be the ideal, right? To avoid doing things we don't want to do. And yet, how many times can we say that and then something just comes up in the middle of the day, a compulsion, and it's not in line with that better judgment to not do that? What's the best thing I could do today? What do I want to do today? So why would we ever select any course that we know is truly the worst choice we could make? Why do people have rent due this week and they drop some money on something they don't need? We know, we're aware, we have the information necessary, and yet we will give in to compulsions. So today, this is kind of what we wanted to take a look at. And I'm joking. I really, really enjoy what you wrote. I just thought, again, that compulsion, right? Where I'm like, well, I want to read something too. Remember the piano in kindergarten?
So much so. So much so.
Compulsion can make you lie to a whole audience. And I've done that before.
Tell us that story. Or I'll tell it because I remember it well.
So we're in kindergarten, first grade, and
Mrs. White's class.
Go ahead and tell it because you're sounding like you have a stronger memory there. You have or more incentive to embarrass. Go ahead.
It's 1978. It's Flagstaff, Arizona, Whitesville Elementary School. The kindergarten teacher is Mrs. White. And Lori and I, oddly enough, this is when they realized that we should probably not be in the same classroom.
Our last year together, yes.
Yeah, this is the first and last. And during show and tell, Mrs. White says, who else has something for show and tell today? Lori, raising her arm as high as it will reach, to be noticed for certain, says, I do. And I'm looking at her, I'm like, I was unaware of this. I rode the bus with this girl, and I have no idea what she's about to do. And Mrs. White says, Lori, what have you brought for us today? And Lori says, well, I want to play a little song I've been working on the piano. To which the twin brother says, but we don't own a piano. And Lori insists, yes, we do. So Lori struts to the front of the class where an upright piano is and just begins to hammer it out. I say hammer because this would have rivaled Jerry Lee Lewis. You were compelled to share that day to the point that it was absolutely, as we can look back now, it was fabricated, but that was compulsion.
The compulsion for me was I wanted my hands on that piano so bad. I felt like something would just happen if I could sit there. I didn't know the discipline behind it or anything else, which is kind of funny because part of this, sooner or later, you have to look at discipline and self-discipline in terms of compulsion. So my thinking was, when you sit there, something happens, like some transformation without the work, which, interesting enough, would require some type of resistance of compulsions to do that practice. And so I'd actually scribbled, which I couldn't even write cursive, so I had scribbled some swirlies on a paper, and I'd set that up when I played. But I got called out on it, and I insisted anyways. So it can be embarrassing when we give into our compulsions right in front of everybody, unless we have no shame like I did that day.
So I'm gonna take this, and one of the things that I absolutely take delight in is making a little bit of a change to a topic that has been decided, and so I'm gonna do that right now. I think that one of the things that we need to consider is always the consequence of suppressing compulsion, because it's behavior like this where there's a huge consequence had it been suppressed. Had you not done that, what would you have learned by staying silent?
And one of the interesting things is you're talking about the difference between being a child and an adult, because when we're children, we have a clear authority, right or wrong, that's going to guide a lot of our actions to keep us on a path that's kind of understood to be right for us. When you say the consequences of not doing it, I'll go ahead and just take the other side, so we have something to pull on against each other a little bit, because with the power of choice also comes really, truly concrete threats can come with it. And sometimes they may not even be obvious. sometimes we can kind of surrender to whims or to something that's pulling at us, and in a weakness of will, or because we want to, in a strength of will that we sometimes can show for what we might call liberty on our part. But we could, something underlying could be developing that's not in line with who we're meant to be in our personhood, in terms of our heart, being aligned with our heart and that kind of living. So tell me about a possible consequence of not sometimes responding to a particular pull. That's, and for the most part, let's say some are just neutral. It's whether it becomes good for us or not, right?
Okay, so I started this out by reading a short story.
Mm-hmm.
That short story is the very first short story I ever wrote. And
It is?
was the very first story I ever wrote. It's unedited, never been modified. I wrote it on the hood of my truck outside of a post office.
Mm-hmm.
I was challenged to write something. That's the story I wrote, and it remains one of my favorite stories. Now is as good a time as any to identify that you and I have two completely different conventional education backgrounds. So for me, having reduced exposure to conventional education, these things are kind of the validation of non-conventional education.
Yes,
so writing a story,
yeah.
not just writing a story, but writing a story and sharing it on a forum like this is big. And I was compelled to do it because in that action is newfound, I don't say this in a flamboyant way, but newfound bravery for me to share something that is imperfect. I think that when you and I record these 40-minute messages, that's also, there's a lot of discovery in that. I was compelled to join you. I think you're brilliant. I think that your reasons, your compulsion to start this podcast was well founded, and I enjoy it. I enjoy discovering things, and so I've really tried to kind of pull out the brakes on these topics and just kind of run with them. Sometimes I give it a lot more thought than other times, but what is happening here is a very free exchange between siblings and between adult, persons interested in kind of the unraveling, the unearthing of, of answers.
Right.
I say answers because I have already collected more than one answer, as we go through these topics, and I think that that's a consequence. I think if you don't just kind of put it out there, you'll never know. It's been said forever that, never asking is a definite no.
Yeah, right.
And if we don't challenge ourselves, if we're not brave, and again, I don't say that in a way that's got some level of supreme bravery. I'm just saying, if we're not brave, if we don't do things that are uncomfortable, because the very definition of compulsion is actions against our will. Our will is to just kind of like stay safe. I don't want anybody to ridicule. I don't want anybody to correct. I'm just going to kind of stay off the radar, but something compels us to put it out there, so to speak. You and I don't know how many people listen to this, but when people listen to this, we're putting it out there for people to just reflect on and say, man, that's crazy. Those two are crazy. And maybe that's the value.
Right.
strengthen their convictions in the way they do things, and that's okay. That's great.
Then it's still
We're all just stumbling through this.
right.
So I think that would be the consequence, is that without a certain amount of embracing compulsions, healthy compulsions, and those are, very personalized. But if we don't embrace some compulsions, then we are definitely leaving something on the table. Now, we also have to consider compulsions that are not healthy. And you mentioned something about, people's spending when they clearly don't have the finances. And I want to think that there's more to compulsion than just socioeconomic background. Just because you can afford something, it doesn't nullify compulsive behavior.
That's right. Yep. You can.
So I think there's a lot of considerations, and this is one of the reasons I had such a difficult time with this topic. Help me.
Well, I like that what you're saying, because it sounds on its head, but one of the places I usually come from when I'm looking at these things is that right now the world is on its head. So that's the clearest view you can get sometimes. And like you were saying, you're hesitant to share this. So, and you liken it to being compulsive in kind of reducing that tendency to want to inhibit something in yourself, to share for hopefully the benefit of somebody else, or to have a look, whether somebody points to it as this defines it or this defines what it's not. And you're willing to accept that. There's a certain bravery in that, right? But the funny thing is to not share it, since I've taken the other view, can mean that you're actually surrendering to the compulsion of like status quo. And I say this because there's no getting around the fact that today a lot of people, let me step back, okay? Because we have this idea of freedom, and I used the word liberty, right? And people can define it. I don't know if it's always been like this. I have my experience in this location and this time. But so a lot of people will call freedom anti-authority almost, right? You're not going to tell me, I don't want to say examples because we're so much bound by that anything can sound political. But and so we say, I am anti-authority. I decide what I want. I'm free. I do what I want. I'm the boss of me. And we can take it so far that we can begin to act without restriction as almost a show of that freedom. But here's the funny thing. Are we ourselves in that? Or do we act without restriction because we have shifted this idea of authority, like where people used to have a boss, a master, a king, okay? And I'm not defending that. I'm just trying to have like a balanced look at just how it is, and then we can go from there. So they would have somebody in command or authority. Boo, boo, who likes that? That's not what we're about, right? But somewhere along the way, these cries for freedom and became maybe one voice, and then two, and then a group, and then a larger group, and then a very powerful group. And to be part of it, at some point, you're just trading, in my view, one authority for another. And I don't see it as necessarily the most right or authentic trade-off. So a lot of times when we say we're not doing something because I felt shy or whatever, or you can feel compelled by this very camouflaged, what did you say that there was, you used the word like an alibi, right? But it's like this camouflage or alibi of freedom. That's the camouflage, but what's underneath it is being controlled by something else, the bureaucracy, seriously, by society. And I have no qualms with people who do that, to tell you the truth. If people feel like that is most right, that's okay. But I don't know if it's whether I'm at an age or because of losses that I've had, or just through, I would say, years of really thinking about it. I think when we're really thinking about freedom and versus compulsion, we have to think, is freedom freedom to me, or has it become an ideology? If that can make sense. And are we a little less aware of it today because we don't feel obedient to an identifiable individual, but it's to this organization? So it's like, no, it's all of us. Come on. Like, I'm free in it, but not if you have to look up what you should be thinking or doing, and people do fall into this. And I think,
Lori,
yeah.
go ahead.
Well, and I think that it makes us more powerless, but we're also less aware of it. So for me, just to kind of wrap up that, because the next thing I would want to say is it comes down to understanding the difference between freedom to choose, which we always do have, but freedom to exercise a kind of discipline to ourself, to our inner self, and also recognizing the difference between freedom and whim when it comes to matters of the heart and its relation to compulsions. Go ahead, I'm sorry, I went on. I got excited about what you said. I can't help it.
So I'm listening to you, Lori, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm thinking about all the different ways that this can go, and something is like, kind of comes to me, and the more we chat, the more we do these topics, the more I realize that it's about a momentary pause.
Yes.
A tug on our heart, if you will.
Exactly.
Where we clearly assign a definition to actions, thoughts, behaviors, emotions. And if we can interpret these things in that brief instance before we act, they can be good things or they can be bad things.
Oh, that's beautiful, Leroy.
Being compelled to read a story when I lack the formal education that so many people have, certainly classes about writing, is that instance where I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this. Is it relevant? Not really, but I'm compelled to share this because we're talking about compulsion. And then you think about gambling, and you think about compulsively gambling. That they're operating in a vacuum void of that momentary pause.
Exactly.
Where you
Absolutely.
exercise discernment over your actions.
Yes.
And you just recognize, you clearly focus on the definition of compulsion, which is an unwanted, a forced behavior, a forced action.
Versus a thought out.
That's right. So we just
intentional,
right? Skip over it.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And therein lies the difference between calculated risk and compulsive risk.
I love it. And I want to add something about, because our educations are very different, and you're the second smartest person I know after myself. So
well played.
But I want to say that you share that story. That makes me so emotional. When I heard that, I actually thought you wrote it for today, because I also believe that there's this more supernatural thing when you respond to it at one time, where you're setting a marker that you might need later. That's a whole other topic, but the idea is that when you make something, that pause is magical, that you just said, the pause before you decide to do something. And in the way that you took the pause, it becomes purposeful. In the same way, whatever I have studied or you've studied or we haven't read, a pause and a series of pauses before examining what that means about us and our life, and the best use we can put our experience. It just is our experience, each of ours. But what use we decide in our freedom, and hopefully in some loyalty to our heart that has its own voice as we do this. And we say, I am open to compulsions, but I also know what I want based on my heart, and I want to do that. So what I'm saying in all this extensive talking is that in that moment that you chose to do it by taking the pause, it was so clear for me as you were reading, like a tremendous part of beauty to what you were reading is that the compulsion you have, whether you recognized it or called it that at the time, to choose a different path of learning and knowing, or to reside with what's within you, which I think you actually are much better at doing than I am. In stubbornness at times, because I don't want you to, you've made it this far without ego, so I'm not going to do you a disservice by just letting it be a compliment. Sometimes it can be stubbornness, sometimes strength, but always you have a tremendous will. And
it's customary for the enlightened. No, I'm just joking.
So the bottom line too with this is that in that moment that you make it meaningful, all I could hear as you were reading that is, what a beautiful response to the compulsion to sometimes not do the normal traditional, go to high school, go to college, do this, do that, because there's a sense in the words that you're speaking of, this tremendous preservation that has happened. That's very different than what I was just saying. That your words were loyal to nothing except it's from the heart. And as soon as we start having measurements given to us by the education system and all that, which I would also make a tremendous case for, because it all comes down to a lot of times our intention, right? And also, like you said, and our alibis and what we call it in an honesty. So it serves you well. That's all. I guess I could have just said, it serves you well, brother. Wow, that took a lot to say. I'm excited.
I think for me, and don't take this lightly, Lori. I mean, you're a very accomplished individual. Your education is impressive. You're well read. You're well thought out. Your writing is beyond impossible. It's magical sometimes, and especially when you talk about things that are very, very, near your heart. Seth is just, amazing. Amazing that you could even have the fortitude to compose such brilliant, immortalizing of thoughts. It's really amazing. So for me, being your twin, I'm on the opposite end, where me doing this is kind of like the antidote for having gone without. This is a way for me this is my degree, so to speak. This is my experience.
Welcome to the University of Lori. I'm just kidding.
Thank you. Tuition is due.
You owe me some money.
So
and you're flunking.
I think it's really neat. I will say, and I can't take 3 steps without saying thank you to my wife. She is beyond patient, because I do operate in a very raw system of thoughts. It's very unbridled. It's I'm just short of hedonistic. My mind just kind of goes, and I follow that, which is very, very close to just following what tugs at your heart.
Yes.
There are boundaries. There is respect for mankind, and keeping my thoughts, my passions in bounds. But my wife definitely is very patient. She's a brilliant lady. One of these days, she's will join us, and we'll have to sit by and idly listen, because what we stumble over, you know, are kind of like untied laces, and hers are always in order, and very very void of gray. It's black and it's white and it's simple, and I'm very grateful that she's, you know, shared so much with me and just helped me grow. I mean, that's what
Yeah.
we're doing here is we're trying to grow. We're trying to
And it does
get
come
to
back to
this.
that, what you were saying when you're kind of at that point of taking the pause. It comes down to having a willingness to be evaluative or to give people in your life permission to do the same, that you trust, that you really trust, see your heart for what it is, because you don't want to listen to, you don't want to dismiss everybody's opinions, but it would be really messy to go through and give credence to what everybody says about us. But you do encounter people in life and hopefully keep them in your life that deserve that say, right? To evaluate. And you have, and in love and in eagerness to become more and to become better, you have to sometimes give assent to it and surrender a little bit to it, because it can also be a very painful process. My gosh, Leroy, I've learned more from pain than I have from any beautiful book, right? In life or anything else. There's that whole aspect to it. Life's brutal to teach us about the cost of compulsion and the beauty of compulsion in the right spirit as well.
I'm sure everybody can relate to this. There's a joke about somebody who goes out on a small boat on a calm day, and the boat capsizes just shortly, you know, a little ways from shore, and somebody comes by on a jet ski or a sea-doo or something, and they're like, "Man, I just saw your boat go down. Hop on the back." And they're like, "No, the Lord's going to save me," you know. And so a little while they drift further out to sea, and
Yeah.
a little while later a boat comes by, and they're like, "What are you doing out here?" And they're like, "Well, my boat capsized." And they're like, "Well, come aboard. We're going to be out for a couple hours, but we'll take you back." No, it's good. Lord's going to save me, you know. Well, I can't force you, so good luck. You know, you want some water? You know. 2 days later, you know,
Oh, dear God.
lips cracking. They're out in the middle of the ocean, a couple of nights alone in a shipping vessel, you know, pulls up alongside and says, "Wow, you realize how far you are from shore? You're in international water." And they're like, "Yep, I'm good." And they're like, "Well, come aboard." And, you know, "Nope, it's good. The Lord's going to save me." You know, well, shortly after that, and they drown. And upon arriving at heaven, they're like, "Lord, you know, you let me down. I was so confident." And the Lord says, "Well, I sent you a jet ski, a boat, and a shipping container vessel, you know. You know, what else do you want from me?" You know, and that's kind of the way it works with this. You know, it's like we go through all these things, and here we are talking about compulsion and involuntary actions or thoughts that produce involuntary actions. And the truth is, we're not talking about compulsion at all. We're talking about the pulse before the compulsive behavior.
That's right.
Which is,
That's
I mean, like,
that
wow.
little, you have to isolate it to have a good view.
Didn't see that coming. Didn't see it coming. You know?
I can't pretend I did because you're the one that said it. So I was going to act like I did, but no. I knew it when you said it.
Maybe you did. Maybe I just picked up on your thoughts. We are twins after all.
Yeah, I think I thought it first.
There you go. So when I talked to Joanne, I mean, we had a very spirited discussion about compulsion, and I'm like, you know, well, we're talking about runners, and there was a time not so long ago, a couple of years ago, and you were insistent that I acquire a Fitbit, because you said, "Okay, here, Leroy, I need you to, we're going to do this together. I'm in New York. You're down in Boca Raton, Florida. I'm going to go ahead and
we can link up.
I'm going to strap on this Fitbit, and I'm going to have you go and pick one up also, but not like later, like today. Like, go to the mall and get a Fitbit."
I forgot I was part of that, yeah.
yeah, darn you. So I go to the mall and I get a Fitbit, I put it on, and all of a sudden I'm like, okay, oh wow, look, yeah, we're knocking down some steps, and before long, somebody, I'm not going to mention names, Lori, um, decided we should join the work week hustle. The work week hustle, and the work week hustle did not work for my week at all because I was compulsively walking. And, we had a goal, I think. What was the goal back then? 10,000 steps?
That's your average day, but then it became a competition where who's going to get the most steps in a week, and then we went off the rails. Yeah, it was
crazy,
yeah.
crazy.
And
then
I hired a paint mixer that just shakes it to keep up with you. Yeah, because you went so wild. I was like, I got to do something. I was paying little kids to take walks with it. Go on. Sorry, just kidding.
So I started walking. I walked to the point of injury.
Oh,
And
how?
I would get up in the morning and, I'd take off walking at 3 a.m. and come back in at 6 and climb into bed. And, my wife would say like, oh, good morning. And I'm like, yeah, sure. I just got back, I'd been walking for hours. And she said, well, you were compulsively walking. This is the spirited discussion about compulsion. And I'm like, well, yeah. And so then we start looking at the definition, and it's against one's wishes, or an action that had no real benefit or no real perceived benefit. And then I thought to myself, but that's a very personalized set of standards, because for somebody who enjoys competition, is it compulsion or competition?
Can I help with it or no?
And well, hang on.
Yeah, go ahead.
And because there is a health benefit, now are we still in a vocabulary sense exercising compulsive behavior, or are we doing something that's got a benefit? I don't know. So this is where it got really, really complicated, and my wife was just like, no, that was compulsive.
Wait, I just noticed your background changed. You're not at home anymore? I'm just kidding.
I'm walking.
Go on. You got kicked out, didn't you? Go on.
It was a good lady.
I miss her.
So it's kind of like, I don't think, that's what I was saying a little bit earlier. I don't think that compulsion is a universal term, because for me, I'm like, wow, I'm doing something healthy. And my immediate, without taking that pause, my immediate defense mechanism kicks in and becomes like, well, you're compulsively at home. You're compulsively relaxing while I'm walking, and so there's just different benchmarks for what compulsion is.
Right, as if identifying that would change the truth of all your underlying whatevers.
And in the end, I mean, it was.
I'm gonna interrupt just so we can finish up here, because what I had come down to, because I had said whim, so I'll finish on that thought, is the freedom of whim versus the freedom of will. What's the difference? And I just want to say this because next we'll be looking at will. And a whim is just that desire that develops spontaneously without structural connection with the whole of our personality, okay? Or even the goals of what we imagine our personhood to be at its best or most true. And the character of a whim comes down to this. So say, we'll take, for example, walking. Is it compulsion? Am I not? You can ask yourself, when I was responding to walking, was my question, well, why not? Okay, that could be more of a whim, where you're not answering the question, why? Because this goes back to me saying where we because it could have a lot of good benefits, but maybe not the highest for the whole of who you picture yourself becoming when you do arrive. And it could be delaying that arrival also. So when you just answer why not and not why, it implies there's no reason against it. You could even come up with the benefits, an argument for it. But it doesn't ask if there's a true higher reason for it. And if there is, what is the limit? And when you satisfy it, should that be the end of it, right?
It was winning, Lori. It was winning the work week hustle.
Yeah.
Was knocking down 30,000 steps a day.
Right.
Or 60,000 steps a day. I mean, it was crazy. What it became. But I think when I secured the win, I was satisfied. Because I don't wear a Fitbit today.
Would you do it again? Well, also you have to mention there was like a fracture involved too, right?
We don't know what it was, but there was bandages.
I remember I was sending stuff for like shin splints. Okay, go ahead and close us out, brother, because we gotta move on.
It is now written in the bylaws for Strong Island Entertainment that we will take a pause.
Got it.
Before undertaking any.
Can you make a note of that, Leroy, so we can come back to it after Will?
Yeah, pause.
That deserves some of its own time. That pause deserves its own pause.
For those of you who have joined us over the last few weeks and are here today and will be here next week, thank you. This is it's starting to grab a little bit of momentum. I think we have like 4 viewers now,
Excellent.
4 listeners, and that's just wonderful. Thank you again, Strong Island, for having us, hosting us, and making this possible. Lori, I love to see your face every single week. I appreciate it. And with that, we close, and we look forward to having you tune in next time.
Yes. And, don't forget to like and share the podcast if you get a chance to listen to it, and also Strong Island
do that?
Radio. What's that?
We can do that?
Like and share. And you know what? Since we're outside of the time frame, I don't care if it's just by compulsion and not genuine love. We'll take it. All right. Until next time, please farewell.
Bye-bye.